Hello, welcome back, everybody, to another year of the Sunday Podcast.
I'm Ollie Lum.
And I'm Matt Seddon.
Back in 2025 for our 5th season. You can expect more of this.
He's claiming that he was ill before the semi-final, whatever. But, you know, I just feel like at that point he was just looking for attention.
And some of this.
And you normally say, no human is limited. So I can't limit myself, or I can't just say I can do.
As well as event coverage around all the major races on the UK circuit.
And if you're a fan of the pod, please give us a rating and review on your preferred podcast streaming service.
And if you want to stay up to date with all the latest news, give us a follow on Instagram at Sunday Podcast.
As always, thanks for listening. See you next time. And we hope you enjoyed the episode.
Hello guys, welcome back to another episode, as always brought to you by Sports Shoes. Ed Eyestone on the podcast today, coach at BYU for the past 25 years, and as well as coaching those collegiate athletes, also coaching a number of professional athletes, including Conner Mantz, Clayton Young, and Kenneth Rooks, of course, medalists in the steeplechase in the Paris Olympics last year. So great to talk to Ed and get his insight coaching both collegiates and professionals, and a bit different from what we usually get, where we're obviously talking to coaches based in the UK. So super interesting to hear from him. Obviously fantastic athlete himself before he moved into coaching, but yeah, we really spoke to him about the last 25 years, how I guess his training philosophy has shifted at BYU over that time, but also how many things have stayed the same as well. Look, we'll let Ed do the talking as always. Matt and I will be back with a review and preview episode of Classic Weekend Roundup next week on Tuesday, bringing you all the latest action that's going on around the world, because track season is well and truly upon us. So thanks for listening to us as always, and we'll catch you guys very, very soon. Okay, first off, Ed, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. Great to have you on. And look, Matt's just said off air, you've had a great career yourself as an athlete, but we really want to chat to you about your coaching and your return to BYU in the early 2000s. And how did the role actually come about at BYU?
Well, I was a student athlete here in the 80s and got my kind of start here. In fact, 1980, I was a freshman and ran cross country, ran the U.S. trials for World Cross, and ended up making the World Cross Country Championship team, the junior team. And that was quite the team in terms of seniors. Craig Virgin was on that team, and we ended up flying over to Paris, and it was my first real look at international cross country and how big that was. I mean, I would say much bigger, I would say, than it is actually now, because it was contested every year. There was a huge European influence, and we raced in, I think it was Longchamps, kind of a horse race course there in Paris. And so being first time out of the country, first time wearing that USA across the chest, seeing the kinds of crowds, I mean, literally tens of thousands of people that were just lining that course. And then to go and had a good race. I ended up third in the junior race, and then being able to watch then Craig Virgin go back and forth with Nick Rose, just basically outkicking Nick Rose for one of the classic world cross country finishes, at least for the U.S., and seeing our senior men do so well there, it really inspired me and kind of motivated me to, hey, I want to keep active in this sport. So I finished up my college running at BYU, and as a senior, won some national titles. Ran 27:41 for 10,000 back when. That was a good time. Now it's not. Now it's really nothing. But it was good enough to have me, I think, ranked in the top 5 or 6 in the world that year, and was able to enjoy spinning off of that, staying here in the area, making a couple of Olympic teams, and actually riding this running career thing into my late 30s. I was running for a little known shoe company at the time in the US. It was called Reebok, that had just started up, and actually had traced its roots back to the UK. Steve Jones was one of my first teammates on that. I was kind of the first American that they brought on board as they introduced their shoe line to the US, and obviously made their fortune out of aerobics, kind of dance shoes. But I found that they had a pretty long history of competitive running shoes in the UK. And so that's kind of a brief overlook at my running career. And about the time I was hitting my late 30s, when naturally you start slowing down and the competition seems to be getting faster and faster, I realized had now been involved in the sport for about 15 years and had been fortunate to be a professional running during that time. And you get to a point late in your career, especially if you go beyond your early 30s. It's not that unusual to go into your early 30s, but when you take it into your late 30s, pushing 40, then you're looking at, okay, what am I going to do now? Am I going to go into the private sector into something completely different business-wise? I had some opportunities there. Am I going to go into broadcasting? Because I'd started doing some broadcasting late in my career as well. But that's a hard niche. Maybe if you're a football analyst or soccer, football in what the rest of the world calls football. If you're a football analyst, yeah, that's a great thing. But as a running analyst, can you really make a go out of that? Well, maybe you could cobble together some sort of career. And ultimately, and I still had a couple of years left on my Reebok contract. What would probably be my final Reebok contract. I was offered an opportunity just to basically start at the beginner level of coaching but it was at a D1 school up in Ogden, Utah, close to where I lived, called Weber State University. And so I was asked if I wanted to volunteer as a coach there. So I spent 2.5 years volunteering 40 hours a week, basically. They're traveling with the university athletes there. At the time I was still running and could beat them all, but it was kind of a fun thing because I was able to train with them and also be on the road with them and kind of be one of their mentors. And I kind of went, you know what? I like this. And it was the one thing that I was lacking from my resume, as I'd coached some individuals, but I hadn't really coached at the university level. And since it's an NCAA sport, there's a lot of rules and stuff that you need to be familiar with. I kind of was able to add that to my resume. And so long story short, when I was about 40 years old, I'd served 3 years as a volunteer assistant. My shoe contract was going to be wrapping up. I was going to have to get a real job for a living. Then lo and behold, my old track and cross country coach here at Brigham Young University announced his retirement. And so I put my name in the hopper, and fortunately they hired me. And that was back in 2000. And I guess it's been 25 years since that time that I've been able to first as an assistant, head cross country coach, assistant track coach. And then about 10 years ago, they made me the head over the entire program. And we've had BYU has had a great and long storied career as usually producing very, very good athletes over the time. And so it's been a great opportunity for me to come back to when you get to come back to your alma mater and step in as a head coaching position, it's just really been a fun ride.
What attracted you to coaching initially? Because it sounds like, towards the end of your career, you almost fell into it a little bit. You were volunteering, but there must have been some passion, some drive there in coaching.
Well, as any coach would tell you, the secret sauce isn't necessarily the monetary compensation that you get, because it can be, again, marginal unless you're in one of the big 3 or big 4 sports. It's the relationships that you have with your athletes and be able to work with these highly motivated individuals who are wanting to get the best out of their potential and helping them kind of realize some of their dreams. Sometimes you'll have great blue chip athletes that you get to work with, and that's certainly rewarding, and to see them win national titles, make Olympic teams. And in the case of Kenneth Rooks, this last Paris Olympics, come home with the Olympic silver medal. That's awesome. But sometimes I would say it's equally rewarding. Some of these guys who just barely make the team, and then you're able to work with them and see them improve and finally break 14 minutes for the first time, and see the joy that comes to them and their loved ones and whatnot. So he used to say, running is a pretty hedonistic endeavor because it's all about you. You got to get your right sleep, the nutrition, you got to get your miles in. Sometimes you're not the life of the party because you got to be focusing on yourself all the time. And the great thing about coaching is it's in some ways it's more rewarding because it's more outward giving, but you're still able to see the joy that comes to these athletes as they're accomplishing their dreams or seeing improvement take place. So like I say, ultimately, it's probably like anything in life, really, it's the relationships that you have in your career and your family and your work life, and certainly in coaching, it's the relationships that you have with your athletes that ultimately is the most rewarding thing.
Is that something that you had as an athlete with your coaches? Is that relationship something that you really valued when you were competing yourself?
Yeah, I think so. It probably got its origin from even dating back to junior high, but then specifically high school. In fact, if I look around my cluttered office here, I'm going to pull up an old picture right here. I'm going to put it front and center right there. See that
Wow.
guy with the nice hair there on your right here on the side? That's
That's
yours
you.
truly back in the day. And acne covered face there. I just won in the state title. And there's my old high school coach, Neville Peterman. He wasn't a man of tall stature, but he was a man of tall character. And he, I was very fortunate because when I came into from, I was a marginally good junior high, sixth, seventh, eighth grade runner. I think I came close to breaking 5 minutes as a ninth grader, which is not a great time for the mile. Certainly, I mean, every year we see young women in the area running faster than that, younger than that. But I love this sport. And then when I got into high school, Neville Peterman, which is Canadian. So Neville's not a typical American name, but probably from the UK. Have a few more Nevilles than we do here. But he had run at a local college. He'd stayed down in the States. He'd married. He'd started a family, and he ran with us. And he kind of introduced me and all of my teammates to the culture that is running, because we all know what a culture it is, particularly back as much now, probably even more so back then in some ways for those small pockets of people. Now we have many more people who have embraced the culture, found out what an amazing culture it is. But back then it was, it was in the probably first running boom. And he was the man who introduced us to things like, track and field news, the Bible of the sport, at least here in the States, and long before the internet. But he made sure that we had that magazine coming into the high school, and every month, first of the month, would run to the library to see what people were running around the country in our age group, and see what the pros were doing, and the guys going to the Olympic teams. Well, they weren't really pros because that was just coming up. It was the early days of the professional running. So it started with a coach, a high school coach in my case, when I was 15, 16, 17, who, had a strength and conditioning class in the morning. In other words, morning run class in the morning. And then we'd have afternoon practice in the afternoon. And this was like, who would ever even think of running twice a day, let alone once a day? But because of coming under his tutelage at a young age, impressionable age, then obviously I fell in love with the sport and was able to, I think, approach my potential, certainly. And it's like anything in life, if you do something well, you tend to kind of like doing that. And I was probably more of a frustrated baseball player up until the time that I came in contact with him, and then I realized, oh yeah, you're okay, you have an okay arm or whatever, but you'd probably be lucky to make the high school baseball team, but you can be a semi all-star if you just focus on this running thing. So that's what got me hooked. And yes, Oliver, that had a tremendous influence. And I can remember at an early age thinking, wow, that would be cool to be maybe a high school coach or something.
I could picture it now. I'm intrigued when you went from sort of being a volunteer coach at Weeby State and sort of assistant and stuff at BYU, but then when you finally get that sort of head coach role and you step into it and you're the one steering the ship, did you go in with loads of ideas where you want to take the program to, talk about that culture, what culture you want to build? Did you have to change the cultures? What was it like that initial first couple of years when it's kind of on you?
Yeah, and I probably experienced that at two different levels. When I came in and was made my first year at BYU, I was the assistant track coach, which just meant I was going to be working with all the distance guys, which I love. But I was the head cross country coach, so I had my own little fiefdom in regard to at the time, I think we had about 8 or 10 guys, but I was able to build that, 20 plus guys. And we have, but it was a challenge because my old college coach, Coach James, had done a good job and had taken teams to nationals and had coached people like, he was a phenomenal coach in terms of people that had come through his program. Doug Padilla, who was a great 5,000 meter runner and went on to become a 2-time Olympian and U.S. record holder at 5,000 meters. Had an amazing kick. Paul Cummings was a great 10,000 meter runner that started off of a 1,500 meter gun. Henry Marsh is probably the most prolific in terms of world championships, or at least world rankings in the steeplechase. So he had worked with a number of people. In fact, in 1984 at the Olympic trials, the U.S. Olympic trials, he had the winner of the 5,000, Doug Padilla, 10,000, Paul Cummings, steeplechase, Henry Marsh. And he was only coaching one of those guys currently, but he had coached them. They had come through his system, the other two. So I was taking over from a man who had been very successful, but like many things late in his career, there weren't as many teams probably qualifying out of BYU as had in the past. And that's just, sometimes it's a cyclical thing. You're up and down. And when I took over it, we were in a bit of a, we weren't at our all-time high. So sometimes that's nice as a coach when you step into a program and you go, man, I know this place has this had success in the past, and currently we're not quite hitting on all cylinders, but because of the surroundings, because of the support that we could possibly get through the administration, because of our recruiting base, because of our facilities, and because of a past tradition, I really felt like it was going to be possible to kind of rev this thing up and get it going in the right direction again. And so that was a fun challenge. And I think any coach who takes over a new program, depending if the program's sky high, boy, that's a tough gig, because then you got to keep that thing going high, and you're probably going to get nothing but criticism. But there are some advantages because it's already sky high, and if you can just learn what's taking it to that level and maintain, then that's a good thing. But it puts a little bit more pressure on you than when you come into a system that's maybe not at its peak. And I felt like I came in kind of at that point, having seeing the potential from the past, and looking and seeing, okay, I think we can build this thing back up and hopefully get it going in a short amount of time. And I think because of our recruiting base, and because of our belief, because of our buy-in, and because of kind of a rebuild of the culture, I think we were able to do that pretty quickly. And remember, when I came on board, I think I was 39 or just turned 40. So I was still relatively young. I could still run with the guy. I was faster than anybody on the team at that point, at least for 10,000 meters. I could still probably run below 28 minutes. And we didn't have anybody currently in the system that could run that fast. Now, I quickly recruited some people that I went, okay, I'm not going to. But I do remember having a serious thoughts those first 2 years, in that I wanted to run the workouts, the 10 by K or the 5 by mile repeat or whatever. I want to run with this group here the first year or two. And sometimes I'd have the stopwatch in my hand, would do the workout, would finish the K, and then I'd turn around and hit their times as they came through. Because I wanted to do that so that the old guys, the young guys, eventually would be the old guys, but by word of mouth, they would be able to at least say, hey, well, at one time, I know it's hard to believe now, but at one time, Coach Eyestone could not only talk the talk, but walk the walk a little bit as well.
That's an interesting concept. How long that culture? You talk about taking those young guys, and them spreading the word in a few years when they graduate, etc. How long? You've been there 25 years now. Does it take for things to change? You mentioned recruiting, but was there any cultural changes that you were enforcing?
Well, I mean, success breeds success, and as long as you have a core group of guys, and the first thing required is kind of a buy-in. You need whatever system you're implementing. There's the old saying, there's more than one way to skin a cat. Yeah, that's probably not a saying you should say anymore, because we're nicer to animals than whoever made up that saying. But there are many different ways that we can build a program, and whether it's the Norwegian system or the old Lydiard, there's so many various permutations and little tweaks and nuances in this sport. But the bottom line is you have to have buy-in from your athletes. And so I think initially it was kind of easy for me to get buy-in, because they were going, oh, wow, this is Ed Eyestone, who, at the time they could remember when I had been in 2 Olympics and had, run good fast times and all that. And so there's a bit of, oh, well, he must know what he's talking about because he's been there, done that to some level. But if the athletes don't start getting the results, they don't really care. And the older you get, then the less they care about your past accomplishments. So sometimes people say, well, if you're a former athlete, then you're going to be a great coach. And yes and no, because sometimes, former really good athletes, they just go, well, dummy, you just need to go faster, because I could do it faster than, so why can't you? And unless you kind of have the humility to kind of break it down and go, okay, well, why was I faster? Okay, well, there is some certainty to the expression that, the best way to become a world-class athlete, whatever sport you're in, the best way to be a world-class runner is to choose your parents very carefully, because there's such a high genetic component to this whole thing, right? But I do believe that you can take anybody, and regardless of how well they chose their parents from a DNA standpoint, I think you can take practically anyone and introduce them into a culture and a system and get them to become better at whatever they genetically are endowed. So obviously there's a combination of the two. And so, in terms of culture, I think you just need to be persistent and believe, and then get buy-in. And then you need to start experiencing some success as well, because you can talk a great game plan, but if every year everybody's broken or not performing, then eventually you're going to not stick around, at least at that place. Now, that certainly applies in the U.S. to basketball and football, because those are the revenue-generating sports in the NCAA. But even track and cross country, if you're not winning on or at least doing okay on a regular basis, then you may be looking for a new job soon. And just depending on the philosophy of your athletic director and what their motivation is and whatnot. So yeah, I don't know. That's a long rambling answer to a question, but build a good culture, have a plan in place, get buy-in, and then start experiencing success so that you can continue to build the culture, recruit the good athletes. And as your program rises in level, then it becomes easier to get better and better and better athletes. And the last, 10 years, our most difficult thing has been, we've gotten to a good enough level, and especially the last 5 years or so with producing Olympians and national champions, not just the NCAA level, but at the USA level. One of our hardest tasks now is maintaining our roster numbers, because there's a lot of good quality kids that I couldn't have dreamed of getting, my first year here, but become a little bit easier as you have more success.
Just on the system that you mentioned, how different, if at all, right, is the system now to what it was back when you started in the early 2000s, and then also, I guess, what you were doing 20 years before that at BYU yourself?
Yeah. Well, quite frankly, a lot of the stuff that I do is based off stuff that good old Neville Peterman did right here. Okay, this little fox, he started things off for this acne covered kid right here with the great hair. Simple things, like, hey, if you're going to be good at this sport, you got to run more than once a day, and at least if you're going to be a longer distance guy, for sure. So there were a lot of the early concepts that came, the intervals, the tempo runs, the double days that came early, back in the late 70s and early 80s. And then I think all good coaches are hopefully, I think a mark of a pretty good coach is someone who understands a little bit of flexibility and nuance and is not afraid to, plagiarize, from the best. I mean, there's new things coming along all the time, and, double thresholds was all the rave, here these last couple of years. And I was probably one of those guys going, you know what, we're doing long tempo runs as it is, and you guys are running in the morning. Okay, do we? Let me look at this and see if that's something that I would want to do. And this last couple seasons, I was kind of, I think my athletes, as much as anything, kind of dragged me to it. Like, God, everybody's doing the double threshold here. We got to do the double threshold. Okay, well, if we do the double threshold and we ended up with 6 miles of tempo at the end of the day, is that really that much different than going on our 6 or 8 mile steady state run here? Well, to them, I think they thought it was. And so I looked at it and said, okay, well, let's look at this. And so now we'll do the occasional double threshold. And they're so happy because they're doing the double threshold. But you know what? At the end of the day, it's just like little tweaks and bells and whistles of the same things that I picked up from reading Martin and Coe's book, and the kind of multiple or various, just working each energy system, strengthening each energy system, whether it's through multi-pace training or the Norwegian approach to things. At the end of the day, as long as you're getting the results, then the culture is going to be strong. And so, yeah, long answer to your question. Yeah, things have changed a little bit. When I was late in my career, I think one of the things that really helped me late in my career is I went down. I think I was 35, 36. I was going into my third, well, it would have been probably my fourth or fifth Olympic trials, but it was the third one that I felt like I had a really good chance. I'd made the team in 88 and in the marathon, 92 in the marathon. I was probably actually a better 10,000 meter runner and definitely a better cross country runner than I was really marathoner. But so in 96, I was approaching, I think, 36. And we were going to be hosting the games in Atlanta. And I just decided, you know what, let's change things up a little bit. If you're doing the same thing every time and you're looking for different results, that's the definition of insanity, right? And so I thought, well, who's doing well? At the time, the Mexico had a really good group of athletes that they were churning out. Germán Silva, Salvador Garcia, a number of guys, and Rodolfo Gomez was the coach down there and had a nice little camp. Germán Silva was the first guy who'd won first Mexican who had won the New York City Marathon. I knew him quite well because we ran on the roads, raced a lot of road races together, and I spoke Spanish. So I said, hey, Germán, what would it be like? I think our Olympic trials were going to be in maybe February. So that's during the winter months here. And I live in the mountains, and it's sometimes tricky to navigate all the snow. He was down just outside of Mexico City in a town called Toluca, and where it was higher altitude here. It was close to 8,000 feet, but they weren't going to get the snow. So I just said, hey, how would you feel if I came down and trained down there and got ready for the U.S. Olympic trials? If I came down and just jumped in with you guys and be there and fly on the wall and just follow you around. And he had an apartment that I rented and stayed down there, and I just moved in, and for a couple months I was down there and just trained like a dog with the Mexican. It wasn't a Mexican national team per se, but it was just a really good group of hardworking Mexican athletes. And I loved that. And I'd learned some things from their system that I've since pulled out and incorporated in both my college guys and the marathoners that I work. And so I think you've got to be open-minded as a coach and to look at different approaches, see what people are doing that are having success, see how you can rip that off and incorporate it into your training group. And then, of course, you're going to have your favorites that you'd like to go to time and time again, and that have led to success for you, and you're going to keep that. You're going to incorporate it, and then you put something in and you find that people get broken, and then you go, well, I probably shouldn't do that again because they're going to take 6 weeks walking around in the boot if every time I do that workout. So I don't know, just some of the fun stuff, Matt. I'm sure you've experienced that as a coach yourself.
Certainly getting there, but not as many of those opportunities have you had yet. But talk about, it's changed obviously over the years. Like you say, you've had to introduce a little bit of double threshold to keep athletes happy. Have you ever been at a crossroads where you've had to sort of completely change or coach athletes differently, even though they're training for the same event?
Maybe two people. Conner 1500 or Conner and Clayton or seeing different skills that they have. Yeah, that's where the one of the wonderful things about coaching, besides the relationships that you have, is just the complexity of it. And it's some people say, well, it's a science, and other people say it's an art, and it's really a combination of those two, because there's so much that goes in, because you got to make sure that, psychologically things are going well, and that your athlete, and you can push some athletes, to the brink, and then others you got to be holding back the entire time. And so the individualization, yet working in a team's structure, can be daunting. And so, yes, it is equal parts art and equal parts science in terms of how you all put it together. And I'm sure for those of you who have followed, Clayton's kind of documentary, the builds and the things going into Paris and going into, I think he had another one for New York. He just finished one with Boston. All of these are great. I mean, initially when he approached me and said, "Hey, how would you feel about having Andrew come and he's going to just have a camera at our workouts?" I was kind of going, well, yeah, no, that probably means I'm going to have to put a clean shirt on every day and then try to come up with something semi witty, or at least not look like I'm lost or whatever. So I didn't know that. I mean, I thought, well, that's good because my wardrobe will improve maybe. But I wasn't sure that I wanted that sort of intrusion into what is an inexact sort of thing. As coaches, sometimes we're having to, hopefully we've got our act together enough that we kind of have a general idea what's going on. But then sometimes we have to pivot, and depending on how the workout's going and whatnot, and do we want that to be people to see that? But after the first couple of times, it's like, no big deal. Andrew's a cool guy, and this helps you with your influencing, and if it can improve your contract and put you in a better place so that you can, focus and continue to do this sport that we love, then I'll go for it. And then there was some coaches are so, they don't want anybody to know what they're doing. So they forbid their athletes to post on Strava, and let's just keep it in-house. Like, come on, it's not. This is not. No, we're not. It's not we're not Oppenheimer here. It's not the atomic bomb, and it's And I think one reason why we're doing so much better time wise, yes, it's a perfect storm, certainly, of fast tracks, fast shoes, fast nutrition, fast bicarb. All of those things are kind of coming together, but probably one of the biggest things leading to this awakening is just the sharing of information and just the internet, obviously. So yeah. So there's a lot of, and it comes back again. Your initial question is, okay, so how do you individualize when you got two guys like a Conner Mantz who just wants to run faster than what you want almost every workout, or at least pushes the envelope. But for his psyche, he kind of has to do that. For his confidence, he has to do that. And then Clayton has, his engineering brain of his realizes, okay, Connor's going to do this. It's going to help me. I'm going to, ride with him, but I don't need to hit the marks that he's hitting, for one, because I can't, he's not quite able to turn it over as quick as Conner is. And Connor's, shorter distances, PRs are a little better than his. But at the end of the day, one of the beauties of the marathon is because of the distance of it and the fuel management aspect of it and the efficiency aspect of it. At the end of the day, they end up being, a lot closer. And sometimes in a race, they ended up being maybe a little closer than even in the workouts. They end up being that. We saw. I think we saw Conner finally come closer to his ultimate potential this last race, and so there was a lot bigger difference of them. But I still think that Clayton, in his better race, can be a little back certainly within a minute of his training partner, and that's exciting. They've got a good thing going. The thing I'm most happy about Conner Mantz and Clayton Young is I think we're 5 for 5 in terms of when you run 5 marathons and you have 2 guys and they do well, and in some ways almost do better with each progressive marathon over 5 times. And so that's 10 marathons, 2 guys running 5 marathons, and all of them being pretty darn good marathons. Then it's the consistency that really kind of defines greatness in, I think, coaching, in athletics, in anything. Anyone can kind of pull the rabbit out of the hat on occasion, but if you're doing that time in and time out, my old, one of my sayings that I need to patent is C squared equals E squared, which is just consistent competence equals eventual excellence, because we don't need to, again, to use baseball. I shouldn't use baseball analogies because this is UK I'm talking to, but it's a beautiful sport. But in baseball, if someone gets a hit 1 out of 3 times, they're about 300, they're going to be an all-star. Okay. But that means they maybe struck out 2 out of the 3 times. So you'd think that's not great, but that's consistency. And so if we can be consistent, you don't have to be great every time. You don't have to hit the home run, which means you hit the ball all the way over the fence, you get around, run the bases and whatnot. But you just need to make contact with the ball each time you're up there. And I think that holds true for athletes and for runners. If they can be consistently good, they don't have to be amazing, but just consistently show up and do good things every day and work out or whatever, then over time, eventually they're going to hit the excellence. Eventually they're going to come closer to their potential. And so we try to work on that. And you're never as good as your best day or as bad as your worst day. And so let's just try to even things out a little bit and have a slow, little rise to your gradient.
But baseball's all good because we've all seen Moneyballs.
There we go. Okay, yeah, that's a good show.
But no, obviously that's obviously the differences between someone like Conner and someone like Clayton. But how do you mix in, I guess, their goals and your goals for them with the goals of the team and having them in and around that BYU setup where they've obviously got a crazy racing schedule over the course of the season? And how do you mix in the guys?
Yeah, so we're talking two different groups here, really. There's NCAA boys who here in the U.S., we use cross country cross country is a big sport for us. That's our fall conditioning phase. And, I appreciate the European system a little bit more. I thought it was weird. Why are we running the World Cross here in March or whatever? But I think it was used more as, conditioning, getting ready for outdoor track over there. But here it's kind of a big deal, and it still serves an important purpose because it's a strength phase where throughout the fall you're running cross country races, and the NCAA system, it's about every once, or we don't go that frequently, but we're racing maybe once every 2 or 3 weeks, and may have as many as 5 or 6 races over the course of the season. At least most of the better programs aren't doing it every weekend because they realize this is 8K to 10K worth of cross country. You got to get some training in between. And so we'll run 5 or 6 races and then culminates with a national championship in late November. And then that leads immediately to indoor track, which for many of these athletes starts the next week, because we take these guys who are at their peak of their aerobic fitness and we want to hurry and get them into a 5,000 meter race where they can maximize on that for indoors, because they have to hit an indoor time. And I'm not a big fan of indoor season falling where it does, because it really keeps us having to do things. I think it overworks the U.S. The U.S. system can easily overwork our endurance athletes, but it's the job, and we have 3 seasons, and so we do it. The coaches that do it well usually will take the guys that are coming off of cross country season, and then that next week they'll throw them in an indoor track race, usually in Boston on a really fast track, and run a meter to capitalize on their aerobic fitness coming off cross country. And then they'll get a time that will then get them to the national meet, which is late February or early March, national indoor championship meet. And then just give them a little chance to rest and then kind of re-peak and try to hit a peak in the NCAA indoor championships. And then that's in first week in March. And then our national championships outdoors is the second week in June. So usually we'll come down a little bit off of the indoor season, build another base, and then try to take it home and finish up with a good meet. That's the college guys. Now I've got these pro guys that are, in the case of Conner and Clayton, they're looking at just probably running a spring marathon and a fall marathon. And then if there's an Olympic or a summer marathon or world championships, if it's an Olympic champion, if it's a world championships or an Olympic year. And so essentially these pros are not, occasionally they'll run with my college guys, but there's not that much crossover. There are 2 different camps, different workouts. On occasion, okay, they're going to do 3x2 mile. Okay, that's one that will work. But my pros are usually a little too fast for my college guys anyway. Now, by the time they get done, have Casey Klinger as an example. He was a multiple All-American for me, and he actually just went pro. He's running for Brooks now, and he's starting to do the U.S. road racing, but he's going to be and finished, I think, second at the road 5K championships a couple of weeks ago, and ran 27:11 for 10,000 meters here recently in the States. So he is going to be our next guy that will be joining this pro group from my college ranks. And he'll be a good addition to Conner and Clayton because I think he's going to kind of bridge the gap between the two. And I think on those days when Clayton's getting dropped, I think Casey will be someone that he can help drag him through. He'll be kind of a middleman. And then in the interim, these two guys are going to be showing Casey the ropes of, so that when Casey steps up probably in the fall to run his first marathon, he's going to say, well, I've been training with at least two of the best guys in the U.S. for the last couple of years off and on, but certainly the last 9 months or 8 months when we get to the fall. So I think he'll have a immediate impact as well. So what I'd love to do is put two guys on the Olympic team for the U.S. in the marathon, and two guys in the steeplechase this last year. I'd like to improve on that in 2028 as we go into LA. But I mean, that's a few years away. Really, just want the guys to continue to have success.
That links in quite nicely to your motivations as a coach, because I'll ask you two questions. Firstly, are you as motivated to coach college guys as Olympians? Do you ever find that motivation drift a little bit in between the two? You might not be able to answer. But then secondly, has your motivation ever dipped? You know, athletes go through ruts. They go through these down periods. Have you ever had that as a coach? Because to be coaching for 25 years at BYU, I'm sure there's been a few years where you've been up against the wall a little bit.
Yeah, all you'd have to do is ask my wife that, and the conversations we have, before going drifting off to sleep some nights. It's usually during indoor season when I'm that way, because I just I hate indoor season. Why do we have indoor season? I've got to try to get, I won a national championship finally. We won our second one this last fall, and now indoor season, we're getting our butts kicked, so why, can't we just pass this? No, honey, that's part of your contract, is that you got to put a team out there indoor season as well. And so, yes. And again, most of the time it's during indoor season that I'm in a really bad mood, but then indoor season comes and goes, and then it doesn't turn out that badly. We get some guys to the national meet, they do well. It's just indoor season is different because it's all about having to chase marks, and it's frustrating for coaches when it's not even about head-to-head competition. It's about getting in the right meet, in the right heat, with the right pacing. And sometimes it's not enough to get to the right meet. You're in the wrong heat. And so there's some politics going on. And if you do not choose wisely, and you go to the wrong meet and it's not the fast track, and then even though your athletes can run really well, you got to be ranked in the top 16, and the times just get faster and faster and faster. That's why that's the extra degree of difficulty in indoors. And I think that's why I might find myself in a little bit of a downer during indoor season. But generally, the overall job and working with these guys and seeing the success they have, even if I'm in a grouchy during indoor season, kind of as the weather improves, we get outdoor season, the guys run. And outdoor season is different because the time that you have to hit isn't as high, because there's a West regional and an East regional, and all you have to do is hit a mark that will get you to the regional meet. And then it's head-to-head competition. And if you finish in the top 12 in your region, then you'll advance to the national meet. And it's, the national meet is more typical head-to-head. It's not about times. It's not about being in the right. So I like racing. In some ways, I'd love just to throw all stopwatches away and just let people run against each other, because that's where we get enjoyment. But we've been brainwashed to believe that, if they don't hit a world record every time, then woe is me, what was the problem and whatnot. And that's a lot to ask. And I think that's one of the drivers for people to use pharmaceuticals and cheat, is the whole time aspect. Well, time and money, certainly money, probably even more so. That's the few downsides of my career, is maybe the occasional time when you're just feeling a little burned out or frustrated. I think as long as the federations and World Athletics can implement the type of testing that needs to be done, that would be the other frustration sometimes, is you feel like you're working with some great athletes, they're doing their very best. They go to a meet and they do extremely well. And there's sometimes just a question mark of, okay, how many of these guys, is he the first clean athlete across that line or not? And I'm not, throwing aspersions at anyone. I think it's in any coach's mind is, hopefully hopefully it's a level playing field, and obviously the cynics and maybe just the experienced individuals among us, which is probably the three of us combined, realize that it's not always the case. You'd like it to be the case, but it's not always the case. But there's not a whole lot we can do about that. So let's just be positive about it, and let's go forward, and let's hope people are being honest, and let's hope the federations, and let's hope the WADA and everybody does their jobs, and the cheaters get called out and banned for should be life, and then we can go ahead and just have fun with this sport.
Is that like a space where you feel that, like on the college scene, you feel a bit more comfortable with that, whereas actually it's when you're coaching the pros and they're going off to these major road races that it's a bit like,
Yeah, great assessment, Oliver. Yes, that is one of the joys of coaching on the NCAA level is, and yeah, there have been a few guys, tap for it, but I don't think there's quite the same level of motivation for it. And so it's not as perfused in the NCAA system because the amount of money that the guys are making. Yeah, potential wise, yes, they can do great things from having a great college career. But I think by and large, it's cleaner at the highest level of the NCAA than it is in the highest level of professional running. And I'm not saying it's totally clean, unfortunately, but I think by and large it is much cleaner. I think the vast majority of the NCAA coaches, upstanding people who want to help their people run fast in every legal way that they can and legitimate way and non-cheating way that they can. And I don't know, I think the motivations outside once you hit the pro ranks, but anytime you enter money into it, and sometimes I don't even blame the athletes because they might be coming from circumstances and are influenced from agents and coaches that things that aren't necessarily accurate. And that's unfortunate. I mean, ultimately it does come down to the athlete, right? But I think they're from experiences of various athletes and they're going to be influenced by those that are in their circles.
For sure. One thing we haven't touched on too much is just recruitment at BYU. We'll stop, and you mentioned that pro group as well. Do you even need to recruit anymore? Do you sort of just take a back step and just let people come to you? You must be in quite a nice position in that sense.
Actually, I'm very fortunate because as the head now, I have some assistants, and I learned, long time ago, I was a young, hip, charming guy, and it wasn't that difficult to and I didn't really, it was kind of fun talking to a high school kid on the phone for 2 hours every night. But as I got older, I realized, I can have an assistant who's also a very good coach, who's, 20 or 30 years younger than me, who's probably a little bit, hipper and more plugged in to all the social stuff that one needs to be. So I'm in a very good, position where I have a very hardworking coach. His name is Ryan Waite. He was a 147 800 meter runner. Oh, 140. Excuse me. If he were here, I'd correct me. 146 800 meter runner for me 15 years ago, and he went on and became served the time as my director of ops, and he went out to Delaware and was a head coach at University of Delaware, and then I brought him back a few years ago, and so he gets to do a lot of that great coaching, and then I'll come in. And one reason why I grew the mustache is just to embrace my grizzled. Now I'm the old grizzled. Oh, he's got, look, he's got a mustache. He must be a character, so, I kind of did that partly just so that I could be, maybe help close the deal and say, yeah. And if you run well here, then there's a good chance you could come and work with our pro group too. And so I think success at the college level and knowing that they have and they don't have to go that route. I've had people join our group that didn't come through BYU, but I think that is one of the perks that I can kind of offer them. And I like that I have pretty good relationships with agents out there. I have pretty good relationships with all of the shoe companies. I'm agnostic in terms of shoe affiliation. BYU itself, Brigham Young University itself, is a Nike sponsored institution. So all of our athletes during their time here will be running in the fast dragonflies and vaporflies and all the, they'll have the technology and the cutting edge and they actually come, have our athletes, try out some of their models for the future sometimes, and then we do some wear testing for them, and they do a great job. But in terms of once they go pro, I don't want my athletes to be limited by needing, and the shoe companies have been fine in terms of me being able to work with their post-collegiate athletes. So, so I work with Nike athletes, I work with ASICS athletes, I work with Brooks athletes. And so it's kind of a nice situation. And I think, and some shoe companies, well, all shoe companies at this point have training groups. They're kind of number one training group that they would, in a perfect world, their guys would all go to there. But they've also at the point, and I think it's due to the success that we've had, where they say, hey, you're having success there. Let's not, if it ain't broke, let's not fix it. And so, I've got a good relationship with all the different shoe companies. And I think ultimately that's the best thing for an athlete coming out too, because if I was only a Nike coach, then we only have the Nike option. And, you got to have a little bit of competition. The competition is always going to drive the price up a little bit. And so we need to do that. Yeah.
Certainly. So talking about that, I guess that collegiate success, one thing we dug out today, doing a bit of research on you. You are the only man in history to win NCAA cross as an individual and then to coach a team to the title as well. Is that a stat that you were aware of pre-winning in 2019?
I don't know that I spent a lot of time worrying about it or thinking about it. I know that so Josh Roatinsky was my first NCAA champion individual, and he won it back in 2000. When did he win it? 2006. 2006, he won the title, and I think at that time I may have been the only coach to have won it individually and then coached an individual. And so then when they told me about the, maybe being the first coach to coach a team, that was another add to that, and that's great. And certainly, I'm competitive, and I can be, I'm not a jerk about it, certainly, but I didn't get into this to, finish last. I want our guys to do well, and anybody in any job, you have some personal pride and integrity. And when you're a coach, then it means, how well you do against someone else. My mom used to love she wasn't much of a sports fan, but she loved the arts. And she always thought, oh, well, theater is so nice because everyone can have a good day. And no one has to have a better day than anybody else, and you can celebrate it at the end all together, right? And that's great. And I've got a daughter who's done some things, and I've actually done some plays myself, and I kind of agree. In some ways, the arts is great that way. But even I guess even if you were to continue that analogy, I guess you want to win the Oscar for best picture, right? And so there's competitiveness in whatever profession I guess you go into. And so I think that drives you somewhat to want to do well. I don't wear it like a chip on my shoulder because I know how difficult it is, and I'd like to think that I can celebrate when other people have success as well. But I certainly celebrate when I have success. I want my teams to do well. I want to see my guys there, and there's a definitely a sense of pride when you see a Jared Ward making his first Olympic team. You see him battling and getting sixth at the Olympic Games. Nobody had him picked to be a top 6 guy, and then you're a little mad a couple of years later when you realize he's the only guy who wasn't wearing a super shoe. But you don't beat that like a dead horse, because then you sound like a sour grapes or something like that. So all of these, the great thing, again, it comes back down to relationships, and you want to fight for you guys. Just like this guy right there, he would have. In fact, I saw him kick in the side of a door of a car one time that kind of cut us off at an intersection. So I know he was passionate about his relationship with his athletes as well.
Yeah. Let's talk about rivalries a little bit, because that leads on quite nicely, that competitive edge that obviously you've got naturally, you have it as an athlete, and it's going to always transition into a coach as well. But the NCAA is a bit unique in that you do go head to head against teams, you know, the pro scene, not quite the same. It's probably more on the individual. You as a coach probably don't have those rivalries quite as much against other athletes or other coaches maybe, whereas in the NCAAs you do. And one rivalry in particular is kind of the BYU, at least from this side of the pond, we always see BYU and NAU. It's kind of the two. So has that rivalry helped you?
Well,
is it a rivalry?
It has. It wasn't for a lot of years because they always hyped it as a rivalry, and then we kept getting our butts kicked. So it was, and I have the utmost respect for Mike Smith. He runs a great program. He runs a legit program, and it's hardworking, and they're at altitude, and they train hard. And it just, because the two of us are in the West, we're not in the same conference, but we are in the same region. I think the message boards would sometimes, you know, everybody loves generally it's everybody loves NAU. Everybody hates BYU. BYU guys are a little bit older because most of they're those silly Mormons, and they've, they're taking 2 years time out to go preach the gospel around the world somewhere. And they're probably annoyed you when they come knocking on your door. And then they come back and they're 2 years older from all this amazing training they've done. And naturally they're going to be good. And so that sometimes gets a little bit old. But so is it. And I think just because at least over the last 5-6 years, we've been relevant enough to compete with Mike's very good teams. And finally beat him a couple of times at the big dance. And so that's nice. But, Mike has been so nice. And a couple of times today, if we can't win, I want you guys to get it done. And part of that's just because I think we respect each other. We see the athletes that are produced and continue to do well at the national level. But if you have a team that you're constantly facing, you want to beat those guys. But I don't think there's any. The funny thing is, you see the athletes, and they get along just fine. It's usually the people it's like, sports fans out there, they're a lot more likely to be rioting in the stands and punching each other in the face than are the athletes themselves. The athletes themselves think it's kind of silly. Sometimes they'll say stuff to feed into it, but I haven't ever seen any hard feelings really with any inter-athlete. It's usually more inter-fan than inter-athlete.
You mentioned earlier things like I guess, the double threshold and the athletes looking at that and thinking, can we start doing a bit of this? Is there ever that within the NCAA where the guys are looking at what NAU are doing? Are you ever looking at what NAU are doing? Do you think they're looking at you and thinking, do we need to incorporate some of that into our program?
I haven't really I'm not really familiar with what they do. So I don't spend a lot of time worrying about what they do. And I think that comes down to controlling the controllable. I guess you can steal some secrets. And I guess if there was something, and again, I don't know enough about their training but I'm sure they're doing a lot of long threshold runs up at that altitude, building the majority off of that, and good quality long runs on the weekend. And I mean, that's the little that I know about their program. So, and they're doing it. One of the nicer things there is they probably have a few more trails to run on than we do here. We have a few trails and we get out on them, but because Flagstaff's a little bit higher and more in mountains where the trails and roads are dirt, then that's one of the, maybe positive things there. But I don't think they were really worried. I think Mike and I are probably doing things similar enough that there's not any big things we're stealing off of each other.
What makes up the spine of your program? Like, what are you leaning into, which you just know is kind of going to get your athletes into shape? We haven't talked too much about training metrics and kind of what you're prescribing day to day, because, as you said, I think it is quite individual. It depends where you're based, environment, culture, everything like that. But what's your kind of go-to? Give us a snapshot of a training week, maybe.
It's very easy in terms of, particularly during the fall, and it's probably applies year round to my 5K, 10K steeple guys. Sometimes my 1500 meter crew, and Ryan's now taking over the 800 group, but I still work with the 1500 meter on up. Is we are a hard, easy approach. Essentially, and it varies according to competitions and whatnot, but essentially we're 6 day a week. We work together 6 days, and Sunday we take off. We do have an off day. That differs from a lot of programs, because a lot of programs might take an off day every 10 days or 2 weeks or something like that. We take one day off per 7. That's Sunday, and I just give that over to them. It's something that is something that is back from my days of training. I found that I felt like I could do in 6 days what a lot of people could do in 7, mileage wise. And I felt like that having that extra day off just contributed a lot to maybe just overall mental health and physical health. It was nice to have a reset every week. So the template more or less is Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday are hard days, and Monday, Wednesday, Friday would be mileage days. So they're not easy days. I mean, if you're a recreational guy, those would be your hard days, right? But and then depending on their event and what, some of my college guys will be going as high as, they don't usually get much over 100 miles a week, but maybe 100, 105 miles a week, split into those 6 days. And my pros will be going 120, as high as 120, 125, but that's not every week. And so if Monday, Wednesday, Friday are essentially just mileage days, then Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday are harder days. So Tuesday might be a tempo lactate threshold type work, which might, could be anything of like 10 to 12 by 1,000 with 60 seconds recovery, or it could be, miles run at the threshold pace with short recovery. So broken tempos, straight tempos, progressive tempo runs upwards of 9 or 10 miles on the progressive tempos, or if it's a straight tempo, maybe 6 miles, or if it could be a broken tempo, like 4 by 2 miles with short recovery in between there. So they're getting some good lactate threshold work. And then on Thursday, depending on the time of the season, it might be a similar workout, or it would be maybe a long interval day where we're doing mile repeats or 800s, or typically things at least 800 in duration, and generally run more at 10K pace, race pace, or 5K race pace. Not usually anything faster than that, at least throughout the cross country season. And then the Saturday will be the longer run, where it will be, over an hour and a half, approaching 2 hours for some of the guys. And often there'll be a couple mile pickup in that, just where they'll get up closer to tempo pace during that. And that, in a nutshell, is kind of obviously variations of that. And then you break it down somewhat as you get closer to championship season. You might bring down the longer run. You might bring down the length of the tempos, pick them up a little bit, so the threshold's a little more intense, and even drop down and add some almost 1,500 meter pace sort of stuff as you're getting closer to championship season, just so they're comfortable at the starts of these fast, massive. You've seen probably the start of the NCAA championships before, when they just have to go so fast early on. So you want them to be comfortable with that. And then and that's kind of the template over at least cross country season, and and somewhat similar to that through the track season. But of course, there's a lot of variation to that depending on if they're now indoors running 3Ks, and maybe it's going to be more tempo every couple weeks, and maybe we're doing on those hard days long intervals on one day and shorter intervals on another day, depending on what they have to get ready for. And then you have all the steeple stuff. I usually start my guys doing steeple workouts the day that cross country ends. Then we starting doing the wall drills and start getting over hurdles. Just not doing any intervals over hurdles, but just making sure that they're getting back, and because we want to be comfortable and technical going over the hurdles. And the steeplechase is a great area for guys who might not have chosen their parents completely perfectly, in terms of maybe not having the DNA to run sub 27 minutes, but there can be a good runner, and now they learn some technique, and suddenly the pool of talent that they have to compete against is much smaller, because not everybody wants to run the risk of running into a 36-inch high 4x4 at 8 flat pace for 3K, as we saw at the Olympics. And so has an element of danger and certainly a technical level that will keep a lot of people from wanting to try that event. And so anytime you make the pool smaller, then if you can learn the technique, then your chance of doing well at both the national level, maybe NCAA level, and then maybe international level increases as well. I don't think, I think Kenneth Rooks would be probably the first to tell you he probably wouldn't have made the final of the 1500, the final in Paris, but he about stole the whole show in the steeplechase.
Absolutely. And thanks so much for, I guess, sharing that template, as you call it. But as the athletes are going through that then, through the season, what is the most important thing that you're tracking, I guess? Is it heart rate? Is it lactate threshold? Is it mileage? Or is it just watching and simply seeing how these guys move?
Yeah, for me, it kind of comes back to the science and the art of it together. And, and you can look at times and you can base off of, I don't have the lactate meter out there. But I can kind of tell by how they're going. And again, where the art comes in is when you're doing these repeats and you're just eyeing the guys as they're running and you're saying, okay, Joey, you need to take this one off, or let's run the 500 of this K instead. And we're going to run the last few where you're doing the 500 and you join them at halfway mark and you bring it in. And, you don't want to see the guys, I think a really good, lactate meter is just to see how they look at the conclusion of each repetition. You can kind of, after a while, you kind of have an eye for like, okay, they're way over. They're going anaerobic at this point in time, and you're going to get some quick gains, but they're going to be very short lived. And you're not going to make it to the end of the season if you continue to push them that hard. One of my coaches, his philosophy, he hated it when the guys were collapsing at the end. And I think sometimes the misconception that people have, especially coming out of high school level, is that, man, I crushed that workout because I had to lay on my back like for a half hour after that workout. That was awesome. I'm going to be so much better. I'm going to kill the next workout. Well, I'm going to kill the next race. And often, how many of our athletes have left their best performance on the training pitch, right? And so one of my coaches just said, his general rule was that he liked to work guys, and whether it be, whatever their particular workload was that day. In this case, maybe we're talking long intervals or whatever, and he'd do those mile repeats until he felt like, and he would often ask me, he said, okay, how do you feel? Can you do one more at that? And it's like, yeah, I could do one more. It'd be hard, and I'd probably be laying on the ground, but I could do one more. And he said, okay, good. You've done enough. Let's end this thing. Mm-hmm. So I usually try to end the workout feeling like, yeah, and I could do one more, coach. I can do, okay, great. We're ending the workout right now because I want you to be able to do one more, but I don't want you to, once I see them with their hands on their knees and bent over, then that's a good indication that maybe you've even gone too far. At that point, if they're on all fours, then you definitely have gone over at least one rep too much for them. Mm-hmm. So I'd rather underdo better to underdo than overdo. And this is coming from someone who's definitely overdone it with people quite a bit. So I'm speaking from experience. It's best to leave a little bit of water in the well.
Mm. I think just as we finish up, I've got to ask, you spoke about that conveyor belt of winning national cross and having to get stuck into indoors. How are you turning people like Conner Mantz and Clayton Young and those guys around, after the Olympics straight into New York and then again at Boston? Like it's just a never ending cycle.
Yeah.
How do you handle it?
Well, I'd love to give them a couple weeks where it was my preference. I wouldn't even see them. But then my office here is also, they see some trainers in here. So, Conner was running probably the next week. It definitely was running the next Monday and had gone with some of the guys on an easy run. But I think it's just the mental kind of break, because right now, both of them are in the process of making decisions for the fall. Okay.
Yeah.
And I'll let them announce those, but they essentially both made decisions for what's coming up. And maybe Jared's talked to you about some of their options, but there'll be fun things, and that's what keeps them driving. And I think that also helps them keep things a little bit relaxed because they know they've got, at some point, there will be a 16-week build where we will be really, it's going to be working hard every day, and particularly on those hard days, those Tuesday, Thursday, Saturdays, because that's essentially the same template that my pros follow. And so it's nice. Somebody like Conner, he'll be running in some road races here soon, because that's what he does. He runs, and that's how he finds joy. And it also I think, keeps him motivated. If it was up to him, he'd be running the Grand Slam right now, because in fact, I told him, I said, you know what the Grand Slam needs? The distance, the 3 and the 5. They need Conner Mantz, because they need someone to get out and just grind it and make sure that whoever wins has to win in sub 13 instead of sub 15, because he wouldn't be afraid of that. And he would know, hey, I'm going to get out kicked, but I'm not going to get out kicked by the field, because, at least half the field's going to be, behind me. But yeah, so it doesn't take a lot, because they're highly motivated and they're professionals at this point in time, and they realize that it's, for them, it's a joy, and there's a sense of pride to go to these world marathon majors or whatever, world championships or whatever it is. It's exciting for them to think of trying to bring down the U.S. marathon record, which will happen, I think, in the next cycle that they go through. It's financially, it's how they're paying the bills and paying the mortgage and providing for their family. So all those things, I think, come together, and they're excited about it. And that's what you do when you're still in your piece and feel like you're in the prime of things. And it's a privilege for me to be able to work with them and try to get them to where they're going, and trying to get the consistent performance that they need in a running career. For me, it's fun. My day job is certainly my college post. That's where my main salary comes from. And then, I'm doing it with these guys just for the joy of seeing them now take on the world and do a pretty good job of it.
Mm. Yeah, that's what's next for them. What about you then? Obviously, you mentioned earlier that you'd love to get 4 guys in 2028, but for you and your coaching, where do you want to see it go?
Yeah, well, I'm happy where I'm at right now. Jonathan Galt, who's our writer for the Love It or Not, the one site where people go to read things, and his stuff is really good on that. Stay off the message boards, especially if you're BYU. Don't want to read that crap. But the good stuff that Jonathan cranks out, I think he's pretty on point. He was very complimentary last year. He called last year the year of Ed Eyestone, or whatever, 2020, 2024, the year of Ed Eyestone, because we had a lot of success. That was great. But, this year started off pretty well. So, and it's not, you don't try to top yourself. You just try it again. And I sometimes say I'm just trying to be relevant, because, there's not many people who were competing in 1980 at the World Cross Country Championships who are still relevant in the sport. And so, not that I'm trying to compete against all those people, but if you're in a sport that you love, then you want to find a way to continue to be relevant. And as long as I can be relevant and be able to, help people, and that's and I think that's the reward I'm looking for. And yeah, I want to continue to be relevant. Yeah, you want to get people on the World Championships. Whatever year you're in, or whatever big event's coming up. If I've got people running at Boston, then I want them to be a top 3 guy at Boston. Or if I'm at the World Championships, we'd love to medal. Or if you're going to the USA Nationals, you got to get on the team first, right? So I think my next big thing for my pros is, let's get as many guys on that World Championship team going to Tokyo as possible. And we may have a marathoner there yet, but that's yet to be announced. So I won't say anything like that. And I think one of those individuals might still be trying to make a decision on that. So we'll look forward to that. And whatever decision they make, then we'll count backwards on the calendar and see where 16 weeks is, and then try to be ready for the start of the next build. And you may be able to watch that coming to your local YouTube channel. Who knows?
What a place to end. Yeah, what a place to end. We're big fans. We've seen it all the Clayton episodes, at least anyway. So Thanks very much. It's been a pleasure. I know you're very busy, so thanks for taking the time.